let's talk about a record here that sometimes we have high hopes and it just turns out to be, I don't know, man. I can't even say other than it stinks. One of those records is right here. Let's talk about that. Imagine you're the singer of one of the biggest bands in the world. Some say the greatest rock and roll band of all time. You know who I'm talking about. Your name is Mick Jagger, and you put this thing out. She's the Boss. When was this? 1985? Yes, 1985. Let's talk a minute about this. This was Brenda's first solo record. Who's Brenda, you say? Brenda is Mick Jagger. During this phase of Mick's solo career attempts, there was some tension between Mick and Keith. And supposedly Keith and the rest of the band would call Mick Brenda because he was so preposterous and pretentious and like an old lady, always throwing a fit and wanting everything his way, that the band referred to him as Brenda. So let's talk about Brenda's first solo album in 1985. This was actually, I think, Lonely at the Top, was it? Wasn't that the hit, Lonely at the Top? I think that was it. Or Just Another Night was his biggest hit off this album, and this was his highest selling solo album. But that's not saying much because he didn't outdo the Stones. But let's get a little bit into this. She's the Boss was a veiled reference supposedly to Jerry Hall. Remember, Mick and Jerry were still around, still an item at this time. The album actually made it to number 13, and yeah, the debut single, Just Another Night, which kicks off side 2, actually made it to number 1, I think. But remember, that's Mick's first solo single. Everybody was still digging the Stones at that time, pretty much. What was that? After Undercover, somewhere around there? Whatever. But people were curious, like, what can Mick do on his own? So, of course, they would all go out and buy the single and think that's great. Would they do the same when the record came out? Not necessarily so. But the album did go platinum, so let's give them a break. I don't think the other ones did. But I guarantee you that was out of curiosity, not because of quality. Some weird things about this. This basically, Brenda's album here, this is the reason why the Stones pretty much broke up, after Undercover. And the reason for that is when the Stones were jockeying for a new contract with CBS, which is the label that this is on, and the Stones would obviously be on after this contract, that Mick didn't tell the rest of the band that he had cut a side deal with CBS, that as part of the Stones moving to CBS, they had to give Mick a contract for solo records. Well, when Keith found out, it caused a huge rift within the band. And yeah, pretty much put the Stones on ice for a while. And for, at least 10, 15 years or so, there was a real falling out, could be even longer if I remember right, a real falling out between Keith and Mick and the rest of the band because of that. Because Brenda had to have it his/her way. Bad move. He thought it was going to be great. Detrimental to his band. He almost lost his pants on that one, kids. Almost lost his pants. But sadder still, this album is proof positive. Well, that ego can get you in trouble. But it's also, no matter who you put on your record, if you don't have the songs, it ain't going nowhere. We can look at this record, Mick Jagger, She's the Boss, 1985, almost as a predecessor to a lot of the current state of rap music. What am I saying in that? These new rap albums have 30, 35 producers on the album, and they still suck. They just can't get one person to get through the album, do it, so it's all the same, it's all good. No, they have to get in several different people thinking it's going to be great, each thing is going to be great, and it's not. Well, Mick did that with this album, way before Beyonce, Jay-Z, you name it, Lil Weezy, or whoever else is, hiring anybody they know to come in the studio. Mick had 30 guest musicians on this record. He had Jeff Beck. I believe Clapton was on here. Pete Townsend was on here. Jan Hammer was on here. Tony Thompson. You might know him at the same time he was playing with Power Station, ex-Duran Duran guys and stuff. Herbie Hancock is on here. Bill Laswell. The list goes on and on. 30 heavy hitters, and you still can't have an awesome album. Proof positive Mick is nothing without Keith. It's all in the pudding. If the proof is in the pudding, this is the pudding, and the pudding sucks. Now, a few other things about Brenda at this time. Robert Christgau, who was the music critic for the Village Voice, he wasn't very impressed with this album either. He said it would be going too far. Let me rephrase that. It would be going too far, unfortunately, to say Mick's a joke. But the only thing left for him to do with his persona is burlesque. Whew, he's kind of run to the end of his road here, you know. One funny thing, though, like I said, Brenda, the Brenda phase, that Mick in the early 80s, and I believe this is referenced in Keith's book, that he talks about this. It's out there. You can go and research in other Stones interviews with other members of the bands and stuff, of the band and everything. But I think it was in Keith's book that he's talking about what Mick was going through at this time. And it's interesting, in the early 80s, remember 83, Mick became infatuated with Bowie. And that was when Bowie was doing his Serious Moonlight tour and everything, and was just drawing crowds like unbelievably. So it was like Bowie was so huge. Doesn't necessarily mean that was a good phase for Bowie, but his commercial appeal was huge. Well, in between Stones records and whatever, Mick was watching that. And Keith said Mick, or Brenda, had become so infatuated with Bowie that he kind of wanted to be Bowie. And this is also the phase, now it's commonplace. If you see Mick on Instagram, he publishes his little choreography courses, which are kind of pathetic. That all started here, in this phase, that Mick had to change. Mick from the Stones was no longer, couldn't trade with that. He had to be something different. He had to outdo Bowie. So he started taking dance classes and started, getting all his moves choreographed, whereas before Mick was just Mick, flailing all over the stage. If you don't believe me, go back and look at footage of Stones prior to like 82 when Mick is on stage, and then Stones after 84, 85. Tell me if I'm messing up there. But anyway, he had this Bowie infatuation. And it's also interesting because the album he listened to most before he put this out, while he was recording this, even Mick, I believe it was in an interview with New York Times, had said the album he listened to most, aside from Bowie, was Prince, Purple Rain. He was blown away by Purple Rain. Still, you're inspired by Prince, inspired by Bowie. Ask 30 of the biggest names in the music biz to join you on your first trek out, and this is what you give us? No. Mick also said in that interview with New York Times that he was just loving music and everything that was happening at the time, and he wanted to make a really commercial record. But not one necessarily that the people liked, but one that he liked. He says, looking back, it's kind of funny, when he made this, he wasn't trying to be super commercial, but some of the songs he wrote actually turned out to be really catchy, didn't they? Well, not as catchy and not as cute as he thought. So, Mick Jagger's first solo album was a flop, is a flop. Even though it was platinum, well, almost broke up the Stones. And as Keith put it, Brenda here with his first solo album, Keith said this record, She's the Boss, was like Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. Everybody bought a copy, but nobody read it. Everybody bought a copy of this, no one listened. Mick Jagger, She's the Boss, but you ain't, buddy. Wah.